Everybody like and subscribe, praise the bell icon. Story number 1.
It happened in the fall of 2016 at a 24-hour discount retail store in a quiet town outside Columbus, Ohio. Most of the employees were either teenagers working part-time or older folks picking up extra hours. The store sat just off the freeway, a little too far from anything to get much foot traffic at night, but corporate policy demanded it remain open around the clock. So each night, 2 employees worked the graveyard shift. 1 cashier, 1 stocker. That's it. Shannon was 22 and had been working the night shift there for about 6 months. She didn't mind it, really. It was quiet, the pay was decent, and she could listen to music while restocking shelves. Her coworker for the night shift, a guy named Marcus, was always laid back and kept to himself unless something weird happened. And weird things did happen. The night shift workers all joked about it. Lights flickering, intercoms turning on randomly, footsteps when no one else was in the store. But every retail worker has stories like that, right? Until the night of November 3rd. Shannon clocked in at 11:56 p.m., like always. Marcus was already in the back unloading inventory. The store was empty except for one man. He stood motionless in aisle 3, the toy aisle, wearing a long beige coat and a trucker cap pulled low over his eyes. Shannon noticed him right away. He wasn't moving, wasn't shopping, just staring straight at the shelves like he was in a trance. Every so often he tilted his head, like he was listening to something. She asked if he needed help. He didn't respond, just stayed locked in that same strange pose. She assumed he was high or just mentally off, and let him be. People came in off the freeway all the time, sometimes acting a little strange. As long as they didn't cause problems, you didn't mess with them. 30 minutes later, Shannon glanced at the security monitor behind the counter. The man was gone. She leaned over to look out at the aisle, empty. Relieved, she figured he'd left. Then, the motion-activated toy on the end cap went off. A plastic baby doll, the kind that laughs when you press its belly, let out a warbled giggle that echoed through the empty store. Shannon froze. It hadn't gone off in weeks. Marcus came up front a minute later, sensing her tension. She told him about the guy. He frowned and said he hadn't seen anyone leave through the front or back doors. They checked the security feed. The footage cut out for exactly 3 minutes, right around the time Shannon stopped seeing him. It gets worse. Over the next hour, Shannon started finding toys on the floor, not dropped, placed, propped up in unnatural positions. A doll lying in the middle of the aisle with its eyes scratched out. A plush bear with its limbs twisted backwards. One of those cymbal-crashing monkeys, turned on and facing the security mirror. She called Marcus again, thinking he was screwing with her, but he was still in the back room. He hadn't left. They started walking the store together, aisle by aisle. No sign of the man. But in aisle 9, the housewares section, Shannon swore she heard breathing. Deep, steady breathing. Close, but again, nothing was there. When they returned to the front of the store, the security monitor showed a figure standing in aisle 3 again. The same beige coat, same cap. They ran out to the aisle empty. This time, they called the cops. But when the officers arrived, they found no one. No forced entry, no signs of tampering. Just toys. Dozens of them positioned all over the store in that same eerie, ritualistic way. One officer joked that maybe it was a prank. Another one didn't laugh. He asked if they had seen the guy's face. Shannon said no, he never turned fully toward her. The officer looked at Marcus and asked the same. Marcus just shook his head. Odd, the officer said, pulling out a little notebook. Because a man matching that description has been seen loitering in a few stores across the state, always at night, always quiet. The thing is, he added, flipping the notebook shut, he's been doing this for over 20 years. They never caught him. The footage always went black, no fingerprints, nothing ever stolen. Just this strange, silent presence and the messed up toys left behind. Shannon quit 2 weeks later after she found a doll sitting behind the counter one night. One she knew hadn't been there before. Its mouth was sewn shut with black thread. She still won't go into a toy aisle. Ever, even in daylight. And the store? Still open 24/7. And sometimes, just sometimes, the night shift workers say they hear the toy aisle laughing to itself.
Story number 2.
Tyler had just started working the overnight shift at a big box home improvement store in rural Kentucky. He was 19, saving up for college, and the night shift paid extra. The store was massive, high ceilings, long, echoing aisles, and dozens of hidden corners where you could go half an hour without seeing another soul. From midnight to 6 a.m., there were only 4 employees in the building. Tyler, a stock manager named Vince, and 2 older guys who worked the loading dock out back. The rest of the place was dead silent. Tyler's job was simple: restock shelves, clean up messes, and keep an eye on the occasional late-night customer. But during his second week on the job, something started to feel off. It started with the intercom system. The first time, he was stocking paint cans when the overhead speakers crackled on, followed by the sound of a low hum, almost like someone whispering, but far away, like through water. He assumed it was a glitch. Then it happened again 2 nights later. But this time it said something. 3 words, distorted and slow. "Don't look back." He froze. Every hair on his arm stood up. He whipped around. No one was there. Just rows of faucets and sinks and toilets lined up under cold fluorescent light. Vince claimed he hadn't touched the intercom. Said the wiring in the ceiling was ancient and messed up. "You'll get used to it," he said. "Happens sometimes." Tyler didn't get used to it. The next week, he noticed that certain items were rearranged. Not by customers, something more intentional. Heavy items, like toilets or double-packed bags of concrete mix, moved when no one was near them. He'd stock them in one spot, walk to the next aisle, come back, and they'd be 4 feet to the left or turn completely around. Always subtle, just enough to question his memory. One night, around 3:15 a.m., he was mopping near the lighting section when all the hanging display lights turned off simultaneously. Then, one by one, they flickered back on, not in the same order, left to right, like someone was walking under them. But there was no one there. Then came the dragging sounds, long, heavy, uneven, like something being pulled across the concrete floor. Tyler heard it constantly during the last hour of each shift, but it never echoed from the same spot. Sometimes it came from the plumbing aisle, sometimes from the farthest corner of lumber, always just out of sight. One night, he followed it, slowly, carefully. He walked past bags of cement, ladders, and empty shelves, and then it just stopped. That was when he noticed it. Footprints, big ones, bare feet, in the layer of dust on the floor leading into the break room. He followed them in, hesitating, his heart pounding, and found nothing inside. Nothing but the TV turned on, crackling with static. He told Vince. Vince went pale. Then he said something Tyler never forgot. "You ever hear of Daniel Harris?" Vince asked. "Worked here about 5 years ago. Quiet guy. Always worked alone. One night he just vanished. Security footage showed him walking into the employee restroom at 4:02 a.m. He never came out. Cops searched the entire building. Nothing. Not a trace. But," he paused. 2 days later, a customer reported hearing crying from inside one of the bathroom walls. Tyler quit the next morning. He didn't even pick up his last check. A month later, someone else on the night crew went missing. The only clue left behind was a deep, smeared handprint on the inside of the electrical panel door in aisle 27. A print too large for any normal hand, and darker than dust, almost like it had been burned into the metal. That store still runs night shifts, still stocks lumber and tiles and bathroom vanities after hours. But if you ask any of the overnight crew about Daniel Harris, they won't answer. They're too busy pretending they don't hear the footsteps walking just behind them when no one else is around.
Story number 3.
Sarah had always been the type to crave a little peace and quiet. She worked as a librarian, living alone in a small house on the outskirts of a sleepy town. The kind of town where everyone knew everyone and things moved slowly. It was the perfect place to settle down after years of city living. She didn't mind the isolation. In fact, she kind of preferred it. But her peaceful retreat was shattered one evening in late October when something she couldn't explain started happening. It began with strange noises at night. At first, it was just little things, a door creaking open when she was sure she had locked it, soft scraping sounds against the walls like something was being dragged. She brushed it off. A house settling? Maybe? Old pipes? It wasn't anything out of the ordinary, especially in a house as old as hers. But as the nights wore on, the sounds became more persistent. One night, she was reading in her living room, the soft hum of the heater in the background, when she heard it, A slow, deliberate thump from upstairs, as if someone was walking heavily across the floor above her. The house was empty. She hadn't been upstairs since earlier that afternoon. No one could have been there. She froze, listening, but the noise stopped. Silence. Uneasy, she grabbed a flashlight and made her way upstairs. The hallway was dark, save for the faint light spilling from the open door of the spare bedroom. As she passed the door to her own bedroom, she thought she saw something, a fleeting movement in the corner of her eye. But when she turned, there was nothing there. Just the quiet hum of the old house. The next morning, she checked her doors and windows, certain she must have forgotten to lock something. But everything was secure. Still, the feeling of unease lingered. That afternoon, she called a handyman, thinking maybe something in the old house needed fixing. He checked the entire house, pipes, wiring, floors, and found nothing. Maybe just the wind, he said, shrugging as he packed up his tools. But it wasn't the wind. Sarah knew it wasn't. A few days later, Sarah was in her kitchen when she noticed something odd. The reflection in the window wasn't quite right. It was faint, but there, just a shadow moving across the kitchen floor. Her heart pounded as she whipped around, but there was no one behind her. No footsteps, no sign of anything out of place. Just the sound of her breath coming too fast in the sudden stillness. The oddest thing, though, was that the shadows never seemed to be where they should be. There was a shape sometimes in the corner of her eye, standing just out of view, yet whenever she turned to look, it was gone. Not a person, but something else. Something that wasn't quite solid. Something that shouldn't have been there. One night, as the wind howled outside, she decided she'd had enough. She wasn't going to live in fear in her own home. Sarah was going to confront whatever was there. She waited until midnight. With only a candle flickering in her hand, she walked slowly through the house, every creak of the floorboards making her stomach drop. She called out, her voice shaky but louder than she'd ever dared before. "Who's there?" Nothing. But the moment the words left her lips, she felt the air in the room shift. A sudden coldness, deep and unnatural, settled into her bones. It was like a pressure, suffocating and thick, weighing her down. Then came the whisper. It wasn't in her ear, but in her mind. Soft, too quiet to make sense of, but urgent, like a warning. "Get out." The candle flickered out as if blown by an unseen gust. She was left in the darkness, her heart racing. She grabbed for the nearest light switch, her hand shaking. When the light came on, she felt something shift in the air. Something felt wrong, as if the very walls of the house were pressing in on her. For the next few days, Sarah didn't stay at home. She stayed at a friend's house, terrified. She didn't know who or what was haunting her, but it was clear, whatever it was, it didn't want her there. When she returned, the house seemed different. It felt empty, like something had been taken from it. The shadows had deepened and the air felt heavier. She never told anyone, never called an exorcist or a priest, but the whispers continued, that cold, heavy pressure. The shadows that no longer moved just out of her sight. They followed her now, lurking just behind her as she went about her daily routine. Sometimes she could hear the soft scrape of nails against wood. Other times, a voice in the wind. But there was one thing she couldn't shake. The feeling that whatever it was in the house had been there long before she ever arrived. And now it was waiting for her to leave. Sarah never stayed a full night in the house again. And a month later, she sold it, never once stepping foot inside after she handed over the keys. The new owners moved in just fine, but they didn't stay long. They left after a few months, too. The house still stands, silent, empty, waiting for someone else to try. And if you're ever in that quiet town, passing by a small house on the outskirts, you might catch a glimpse of something through the window. A shadow that shouldn't be there.
Story number 4.
It was an ordinary Thursday afternoon when Maya first started noticing it. She'd recently moved into an old 2-story house on the edge of town, something she could afford after taking a new job in a city that wasn't exactly known for its vibrant real estate market. The house had character. Old wooden floors, creaky stairs, and a large backyard that felt strangely isolated, despite being only a short drive from the city center. She wasn't a fan of the big city, so this quiet, slightly worn-out house seemed perfect. She could see herself there for years. The neighbors, though, had all been strange. When she moved in, no one had come to introduce themselves. Not a single hello, no friendly wave, just a few cold stares from the windows of the houses on either side. She tried not to think too much about it. It wasn't until the second week that she noticed the first odd thing. Maya had just come home from work, carrying a stack of mail when she realized the front door was ajar. Not wide open, just a crack. She was certain she had locked it when she left that morning. She wasn't paranoid, but she double-checked the locks every time. But this time, someone had been inside. She didn't panic, though. It was a calm, almost clinical realization. Maybe the door hadn't latched properly? After all, she lived alone and hadn't noticed anything out of the ordinary. She closed the door and locked it again. The next night, it happened again. The door was open just slightly, and this time there was something else. Small objects moved around inside the living room. Nothing valuable, just her keys, a couple of books on the coffee table. It wasn't much, but it felt wrong, like someone had been there. She decided it was her imagination. Maybe she was just tired, adjusting to the new house, the new routine. Still, she made sure to lock the door even more carefully after that. But then the noises started. It was around midnight when she first heard it. The slow scraping sound from upstairs. Like something heavy was being dragged across the floor. At first, she thought it was a branch scraping against the window, but when she got up to check, she found nothing outside. The sound continued, though, coming from above her. She stood frozen in the middle of the hallway, heart pounding as the scraping grew louder, more deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. She checked every room upstairs. Nothing. It had to be the house settling, right? A fluke, a creak in the floorboards. But the noises didn't stop. They continued every night, always at exactly midnight. It was like clockwork. Tap, scrape, drag, drag, drag. The same sound over and over. It took her a week before she finally decided to investigate the source of the noise. She climbed the stairs slowly, the air thick with tension. The sounds were louder now, echoing from the farthest bedroom at the end of the hall. The room had been locked since she moved in, and the key was missing. But when she tried the handle, it opened. The room was completely empty, save for one thing. On the far wall, there was a large framed photograph, its glass cracked. It was a picture of a family, a man, a woman, and 2 children. They stood in front of the house, her house, and smiled. But something was wrong. Their eyes were dark and their smiles too wide. She turned to leave, but the scraping sound returned, louder now, like something was dragging behind her. As she turned to face the door, she saw it. A figure, standing in the hallway. It was tall, dressed in an old-fashioned suit, with the same dark eyes as the people in the photo. It didn't move, just stood there, staring at her. Maya could feel her heart hammering in her chest as she backed away, nearly tripping over the floorboards. The figure didn't follow, but she felt its presence, heavy, oppressive, like the weight of the house itself had suddenly turned against her. In a blind panic, she bolted downstairs, locking every door behind her. She couldn't stay in that house. Not anymore. The next day, she called a local historian. Maybe there was something about the house's past she didn't know. The historian was hesitant, but after some persuasion, he told her the house had once belonged to the Ravenscroft family, back in the 1920s. The family had lived there for years, until the night they disappeared. No trace was ever found, but rumors swirled that the family had simply vanished. There were whispers about strange happenings in the house even then, things people wouldn't talk about in public. Maya couldn't shake the image of that photograph, the family, so familiar, standing before the house she now called home. She hadn't realized it before, but the more she thought about it, the more it terrified her. She moved out within the week. The new owners came in shortly after. Maya never saw them again, but every now and then, if she drives by that street late at night, she swears she can see them, the family, standing in the window, staring out at her. And she's sure, deep down, that they'll never leave. Not until the house claims someone else. And the worst part? That family is still there. The problem is, no one ever notices them. They just look like they belong.
Story number 5.
It was late on a Friday when Jessica decided to take the back road home. She usually drove through the main highway, but it had been a long week, and something about the winding tree-lined road felt peaceful. She had just moved to this small, out-of-the-way town a few months ago, looking for some quiet after the chaos of the city, and the solitude was nice. She loved the idea of having a peaceful life, away from the noise. The back road, however, was dark, the kind of dark where the trees created a canopy overhead, blocking out most of the moonlight. Jessica had taken this route a few times before, but tonight, it felt different, unnerving. The road stretched out before her in a serpentine twist, and her headlights barely cut through the thick darkness. The air was thick, almost as if the night itself was pressing down on her. At first, she dismissed the feeling as paranoia. After all, she was just tired from the week's work. But the farther she drove, the more she felt like something wasn't right. A sound caught her attention, a soft thump, then another. It was a faint, rhythmic sound, almost like footsteps. But there was no one around. No cars, no pedestrians, just the empty road stretching on in front of her. Her heart began to race as she glanced nervously at the rearview mirror. Nothing. The road behind her was empty. But still, the sound persisted, like a heartbeat thumping in the distance. She glanced at her phone to check the time. 2:14 a.m. It seemed later than it should have been, and for a brief moment, she considered pulling over to gather her thoughts. But she didn't. She pressed on, telling herself it was just her imagination or maybe an animal pacing behind her car. But with every thump, her anxiety built. She tried to shake the feeling, but it wouldn't let go. Then came the tapping. It was subtle at first, just a gentle tap against the window. But it was there, right there. Just loud enough to be noticed, but soft enough to leave her unsure if she had actually heard it. The kind of sound that made your heart leap into your throat. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tighter, and she quickly glanced at the side mirror, trying to see if anything was out of place. Nothing. But the tapping continued, slow and steady, right along with the rhythm of the thumping sound. The worst part? The tapping wasn't coming from the window. It was coming from inside the car. The back seat. Tap, tap, tap. Her pulse spiked. There was no way anyone could be in the back seat. She would have seen them when she got in. The car was locked. The doors were secure, but the tapping grew louder, insistent, as if whatever was there was testing the window, trying to get her attention. She couldn't take it anymore. Her heart was pounding, and she felt the rising panic in her chest. She slammed her foot on the gas, speeding up. The road ahead seemed to stretch endlessly, but the tapping kept pace with her, like a relentless reminder that she wasn't alone. With every mile, the tapping became more urgent, louder. It was as if something was right behind her, growing closer. Tap, tap, tap. Her hands were slick with sweat. Her mind raced as she sped along the narrow, winding road, desperate to escape whatever was following her. She could barely see through the windshield now, her vision clouded by panic. The sound of the tapping filled her ears, louder than her own heartbeat. And then, suddenly there was a screeching sound, like something scraping along the side of the car. The tires skidded on the gravel as she swerved, and in the blink of an eye she was off the road, the car spinning wildly before coming to a stop against a tree. Her chest heaved as she tried to catch her breath, her hands shaking. The world around her was silent now, no tapping, no footsteps, just the sound of her own ragged breathing. Slowly she turned to look at the back seat. Nothing. She sat there for a long moment, just staring, trying to convince herself she'd imagined the whole thing. But something in the air was off, heavy with an unsettling stillness. When she finally worked up the courage to step out of the car, she didn't immediately see anything wrong. But then she glanced at the rearview mirror, and her blood ran cold. In the reflection, someone was sitting in the back seat. Not a person, not a figure, but a shape, dark and blurred, like a shadow that didn't quite belong. It moved, slowly, deliberately, and then just as quickly, it was gone. Jessica didn't hesitate. She slammed the car door shut, started the engine, and didn't stop driving until she reached her apartment. The rest of the night was a blur of exhaustion and terror. The next day, she drove the same road again, just to make sure, and this time there was no thumping, no tapping, no figure in the mirror. But the strange thing was, as she passed the spot where she had swerved off the road, she noticed something in the dirt near the shoulder. Footprints, large, muddy prints, too big for human feet. They led off into the trees and disappeared into the darkness. And in that moment, Jessica knew one thing for sure. Whatever had been in that car, whatever had been following her, wasn't just in her mind. It was still out there, waiting. And it was getting close.
Story number 6.
Tim had always been a fan of camping. Growing up, he'd spent countless weekends with his dad and brother in the wilderness, trekking through forests, fishing by rivers, and sleeping under the stars. As an adult, he hadn't gotten out nearly as much, so when a weekend camping trip with his friends came up, he was eager to get back into it. This time, they were going to a remote spot he'd never been before, deep in the Appalachian Mountains. The trail was remote, so remote that there was no cell service and barely any signs of civilization for miles. It was just what they needed, an escape from the noise of the city and a chance to reconnect with nature. The hike-in was beautiful, though a little more challenging than expected. The path twisted through dense trees and the air smelled thick with pine and fresh earth. They reached their campsite as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the woods in a dusky glow. After setting up tents and a fire, the group settled in with some beers, telling stories and laughing about old memories. The first night passed without incident. The wind whispered through the trees and the occasional owl hooted in the distance. Tim felt at peace, the kind of calm he hadn't realized he was missing. But then on the second night, something changed. They'd all turned in for the night, tired from a day of hiking, when Tim was jolted awake by a sound outside the tent. It wasn't the typical sounds of the forest, the wind, the rustle of leaves, the occasional animal. This was something different. It was a low, guttural thumping, like something large was moving through the underbrush. At first, he dismissed it as an animal, a bear maybe. The area was known for wildlife, but the thumping grew louder. It didn't seem random, like an animal searching for food. It was steady, deliberate, like something was pacing the perimeter of their campsite. Tim lay still, trying to listen. The others were asleep, oblivious. He could feel his heartbeat in his chest, quickening with each heavy thud of whatever was out there. He tried to convince himself it was just a deer or some other animal, but the longer it went on, the more unsettled he became. It wasn't right. Finally, he crawled out of the tent, holding his flashlight tight in his hand. The beam of light cut through the darkness, illuminating the trees around him, but there was nothing but shadows and the thick undergrowth. He stood still, listening. The thumping had stopped. The forest had gone eerily quiet. He walked around the campsite, shining the light, checking the perimeter. His mind raced with possibilities. Maybe it was a person, someone else camping out here, a prank? But that didn't explain the sound, the way it had been pacing. As he made his way around the campfire pit, he spotted something strange. Footprints. Large, deep impressions in the soft earth. They were too big to be from any animal he knew, and they didn't look like human tracks either. The prints were bare, and the oddest thing, each one was slightly off-center, as if something had been dragging its foot along the ground. Tim felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. The air felt colder now. He walked a little further and found more prints. They led away from the campsite and into the woods. Tim hesitated. Something about it felt wrong, like he shouldn't follow. But he couldn't stop himself. The curiosity gnawed at him, and the thumping sound from earlier still echoed faintly in his ears. He followed the trail, his flashlight trembling in his hand as the prints led him deeper into the woods. The trees grew thicker, blocking out most of the moonlight. The silence pressed in on him, heavy and suffocating. The further he went, the more he began to feel like he wasn't alone. And then he saw it. A figure, tall, hunched over, standing just past the trees. It was motionless, like it was waiting. Time's breath caught in his throat, and he froze. His mind raced. Was it a person? A man or some twisted figure out here in the dark? But no part of it seemed human. The thing was impossibly tall, with limbs that seemed too long, its skin pale and gray. It didn't turn toward him, but Tim could feel its gaze on him, as if it were watching. Without thinking, he turned and ran back to the campsite. The image of that figure burned into his mind. His heart was racing, his feet pounding the forest floor. But when he finally reached the camp, the others were still sound asleep. The fire was dying, flickering weakly. He didn't know what to say. How could he explain what he'd just seen? His breath was ragged and his body shook with adrenaline. He sat down on the ground, trying to calm his nerves. Was it real? Or had he imagined it? He didn't sleep that night. When the others woke up, he pretended like nothing had happened. They packed up and left the campsite as planned, the morning light bringing some relief to the tension of the night. But as they walked back down the trail, Tim glanced back one last time at the dense woods. And in the distance, just beyond the trees, he saw something else. A shadow, tall and elongated, moving between the trunks, keeping pace with them as they left. That figure never left his thoughts. He didn't go back to those woods again, and he never went camping in that area again. But the strangest part, the footprints he had found, they weren't there when he went back to the spot the next morning. It was as if whatever had been out there had never existed. But Tim knew what he saw. He'd never forget it. And something told him that whatever it was, whatever he had followed into the woods, was still out there, waiting for the next person to wander too far off the path.
Story number 7.
Megan had always thought the idea of a haunted house was something reserved for old, dilapidated buildings, the kind of places you see in horror movies or hear about in creepy campfire stories. She never thought she'd end up living in one. It was an old Victorian house, the kind with creaky floorboards, towering windows, and a sprawling yard that stretched on for what felt like miles. When she moved in, it was for the promise of space and a quiet neighborhood, a place to get away from the chaos of her job and the noise of the city. It was exactly what she needed, or so she thought. At first, everything seemed normal. Megan loved the charm of the old house, with its tall ceilings and antique furniture that came with it. The neighborhood was quiet, peaceful, but soon enough, things began to shift, little by little, until they became too hard to ignore. It started with the mirrors. At first, Megan thought it was just a trick of the light. When she'd walk past the long hallway mirror, she'd sometimes think she saw movement in the reflection. A flicker of something, maybe someone standing just behind her. But every time she turned around, there was nothing there. It was always a fleeting thing, so she dismissed it as her imagination. But then, things started to get worse. One night, as Megan was getting ready for bed, she caught something in the corner of her eye. It was her reflection in the bedroom mirror, but it was wrong. The reflection of her face was distorted, as if something was pressing against the glass from the other side. The image twisted unnaturally, the eyes stretching wide, the mouth opening in a grotesque smile that didn't match her own. Megan stumbled backward, her heart racing, but when she looked again, the mirror was normal. Her own reflection stared back at her, unchanged. That was the first night she heard the whispers. They started softly, like distant murmurs at the edge of her consciousness. But the more she tried to ignore them, the louder they became, until it was like someone was standing right behind her, breathing down her neck. She would turn, expecting to see someone, but there was no one there. Sleep deprivation set in. She tried closing the mirrors with sheets, covering them up, but the whispers only grew stronger. They followed her everywhere, around corners, down hallways, even in the kitchen while she prepared meals. Always just out of reach, just beyond her understanding. And then one night, she woke up to find something that made her blood run cold. Her bedroom door, which she had locked before going to bed, was wide open. She hadn't heard anyone enter. She knew she had locked it. But there it was, standing open, and with it the unmistakable smell of something rotten, something decayed. She had no idea what it was, but it filled the room like a heavy fog. Terrified, she grabbed her phone and turned on the flashlight, shining it around the room. Her breath caught in her throat as she froze in place. On the floor, near the foot of her bed, was a single, large handprint. It was smeared in something thick and dark, almost like blood, but with the unmistakable texture of something far worse. She couldn't even begin to imagine what it was. Frantically, she checked the rest of the house. The living room, the kitchen, the hallway. Each mirror, each reflective surface was covered with those same dark handprints. She didn't know what was happening or who, or what was doing this, but there was no denying it. Something was in the house with her. And that's when she made the decision. She couldn't stay there any longer. The whispers, the handprints, the strange, distorted reflections, it was all too much. The next morning, Megan called a friend to help her pack up and move. They left the house as quickly as they could, leaving the door wide open, the mirrors uncovered. She didn't care about the house anymore or the belongings she left behind. It wasn't worth it. But here's the thing. Megan never left completely. She tried to, of course. She moved to a small apartment on the other side of town, but the memories followed her. The whispers at night, the feeling of being watched, the way her reflection would sometimes twist in the bathroom mirror, they never went away. She thought she could escape, but she couldn't. A few weeks after she moved out, Megan visited the old house. She couldn't stay away. Something about it was pulling her back, like a magnet. She stood on the front porch, staring at the house for a long time before she finally turned the knob and entered. It was quiet inside, eerily still, just as she remembered. But as she stepped into the hallway, she noticed something strange. The mirrors were gone, every single one. Megan felt a chill race up her spine, and she turned to leave, but before she could, she heard the faintest whisper. So soft, so close, it sounded like it was right in her ear. "You never really left," it whispered. And that's when she saw it, her reflection, staring at her from a cracked mirror on the far wall. But it wasn't her. It was the twisted, distorted version from before. The wide eyes, the grotesque smile. It didn't belong to her, and it didn't belong to anyone. It belonged to whatever had always been there, whatever was waiting. And Megan realized, too late, that she hadn't escaped. She never would. She was still trapped in the house, still a part of it, and whatever had been following her, it would never let her go.
Story number 8.
Lena had always been a creature of habit. She lived alone in a quiet suburban neighborhood and loved the peace that came with it. Her home was her sanctuary, a place where she could unwind after a busy day, read, watch TV, and simply be at ease. Everything was in its place, everything predictable. One evening, as she was making dinner, she noticed something strange. She had just grabbed a can of soup from the pantry, but as she reached for the lid, she saw that it was already open. The tab was pulled back, the top partially bent. Lena paused, confused. She was sure she hadn't opened it, and she certainly hadn't left it like this. She checked the kitchen for any signs of someone else having been there. No doors were open, no items misplaced. She shrugged it off, assuming she'd just been distracted and forgotten. But it bothered her. She didn't like not being sure. That night she went to bed, but something was off. The house felt different. The silence was thick. The kind of silence that made the shadows in the corners seem to stretch longer, heavier. She tried to sleep, but her mind wouldn't quiet. The thought of the open soup kept circling her thoughts, nagging at her. She decided to get up for a drink of water. When she stepped into the kitchen, she froze. The soup wasn't the only thing out of place. Her kitchen counter was cluttered with items she didn't remember leaving there. A half-open bag of flour, a jar of sugar, a handful of dirty dishes. But Lena had left the kitchen clean. She was meticulous about keeping things in order. She had even wiped the counters down just before dinner. Her heart began to race. Someone had been in her house. Someone had gone through her things. But how? She checked all the doors and windows, but everything was locked. The house was secure. She called the police, and they arrived shortly, but there was no sign of forced entry, no signs of a break-in. The house was exactly as it should be. "Are you sure no one else has access to the house?" the officer asked gently, clearly trying to ease her panic. Lena nodded, feeling embarrassed. "No," she whispered, "I'm sure. I've been here all day." The officer reassured her it was likely just a mistake, a moment of forgetfulness. But Lena couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The next few days were a blur. Things around the house kept getting moved, small things. A book that was left open on the table would be closed when she returned. A lamp that was left on would be turned off. Each time, Lena would try to convince herself she was imagining it, that she was just being paranoid. But then, one evening, the doorbell rang. It was late, later than anyone would normally come by. When Lena answered, no one was there. But on the doorstep, there was a small handwritten note. "Why are you still here?" She froze, her blood running cold. The handwriting was unfamiliar, jagged, almost manic in its scrawl. Her mind raced. Who could have left this? Was it a prank? A joke? The fear started to bubble up inside her again. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, wide awake, staring at the ceiling. The house was unnervingly quiet, but she kept hearing something faint, like footsteps in the hall. She got up to check, and as she stepped into the hallway, she saw something that made her heart stop. The kitchen light was on. She was sure she had turned it off before going to bed. Lena crept toward the kitchen, her pulse quickening. As she neared the doorway, she saw the outline of someone standing by the counter. A man. He was tall, wearing a dark hoodie, his back to her. He was bent over, rummaging through her cabinets. She froze in place, not knowing what to do, her body rooted to the floor by sheer terror. She opened her mouth to scream, but nothing came out. The man didn't seem to notice her at all. He was moving slowly, deliberately, almost methodically, as if he had every right to be there. Lena's instincts kicked in, and she bolted for the door. She ran outside into the street, screaming for help. Neighbors came out to check, but when the police arrived, the house was empty. The door was locked, the windows secure. No one had been inside, except Lena was certain she had seen him. She could still feel his presence, the chill that came with his cold, empty stare. But when the officers searched the house, they found nothing, not a trace. Lena spent the next few days terrified to go home, even though she knew it was her only option. She couldn't afford to stay anywhere else. It was a week before she started hearing the sounds again. Late at night, the thumping of footsteps, the creaking of the stairs. Something or someone was walking around in the house when she was alone. But every time she checked, the house was empty. And then one night, she woke up to something new. The walls were covered in writing, strange symbols, scratches. She could barely make sense of it, but one word stood out among the chaos. Leave. In the dim light of her bedroom, Lena's blood ran cold. The house was trying to tell her something, but the worst part wasn't the strange symbols or the footsteps. It wasn't the note left on her doorstep or the man in the kitchen. It was the fact that no matter what she did, she couldn't leave. She couldn't leave because each time she tried, the house itself seemed to pull her back. Her own home had become a prison. And worse, Lena realized that the longer she stayed, the more she lost control. Something was in the house with her, something that had found a way to stay, something that wanted her to stay too. She was trapped. And the house never let go.